Wouldn't it be nice if statues would stop being toppled? Wouldn't it be nice if history was not being actively rewritten in front of our eyes? You guys remember when John Oliver mocked Trump in 2017 for saying that George Washington statues and Jefferson statues were coming after some Confederate statues were taken down? Oh, if you don't, I'll jog your memory here for a minute. President Trump warned in 2017 that statues of U.S. founding fathers such as George Washington and Thomas Jefferson might someday be removed, 3 years ahead of such statues this month. Back then, last week's night's host, John Oliver, I don't know, man. At least in my opinion, he is the most unlikable late night host. Mocked the president for his grim prediction. So this week it's Robert E. Lee. I noticed that wasn't him yet. I was just warming up. So this week it's Robert E. Lee. I noticed the Stonewall Jackson is coming down, Trump said at an August 2017 news conference on the protests that year in Charlottesville, Virginia, that sparked the plans to remove some Confederate statues. I wonder, is it George Washington next week? And is it Thomas Jefferson the week after? You really have to ask yourself, where does it stop? Trump said. Oh boy, if you only knew. I'll tell you where it stops. I'll tell you where it stops. I have to get into condescending mode. Oliver replied during an episode of his weekly terrible, disgusting show. Somewhere, anytime someone asks where does it stop, the answer always is somewhere. You might let your kid have a Twizzler, but you don't inject black tar heroin. You don't go, well, after Twizzlers, where does it stop? This guy, I don't think he's ever had a take that's aged not unlike milk. Then he takes those predictions and splashes it on his neck and back. I'm not saying he's a homosexual, I just think he plays one on TV. Black Lives Matter protesters earlier this month started pulling down Confederate statues. The trend soon led to attacks against statues of other historical figures, such as Christopher Columbus and former President Ulysses S. Grant, who led the North, by the way, during the Civil War. Then, last Sunday, a Jefferson statue was knocked down in Portland, Oregon, followed by a similar attack on Washington statue on Thursday in the same city. Before we jump to what happened last night in Portland, which, for whatever reason, I'm paraphrasing the president again. What happened last night in Sweden? Well, what happened last night in Portland was similarly disgusting. But there's also a statue in Seattle, and it hasn't been touched yet by anybody. And I'll pull it up here real quick. This is from Newsweek. Seattle's Fremont neighborhood is home to an assortment of eccentric sculptures, including one 16-foot statue of founding father of the Soviet Union in America, in Seattle. And guess what? It hasn't been touched throughout the entirety of these protests, riots, unrest, whatever you want to call them. The statue of communist revolutionary Vladimir Lenin is both venerated and loathed, as it should be loathed. Venerated. I understand, it's kind of like the same conversation you can have about the Confederate statues out there. You need to understand your history, but Soviet Union actively tried to take down the West. So why the fuck is his statue up there? Put it in a museum or a museum adjacent to the landfill. I don't care. It was toppled once, decades ago during the collapse of the Soviet Union, probably in celebration, and a vocal contingent would like to see that same statue come down in Seattle. I've never been to Seattle, but I would love to see it come down. That was just a little bit of context, but yeah, what happened last night in Portland? Well, I've got some pictures of the shit that happened. Protesters topple statues of former presidents Theodore Roosevelt, which they have done before, but this is a new one. Abraham Lincoln. You know that noted racist Abraham Lincoln. Protesters toppled statues of former President Theodore Roosevelt and Abraham Lincoln. A group of protesters toppled statues of former President... Yeah, we get it. There's the Abraham Lincoln statue that was toppled. That is a big mural outside of the Oregon Historical Society. That was paint bombed, I suppose. And then, yeah, front offices of a bunch of entrances, into the Historical Society as well. And then we got Teddy Roosevelt statue. Yep. Stolen land. Man. Trying to make him a Simpsons character there. Like, all this stuff is so fucking absurdly stupid. I mean, what the fuck are they actually hoping to accomplish by toppling a bunch of statues of great men who have accomplished a lot? Well, I know what they're trying to accomplish. Hell, there is another half of this video after all. So the reason they toppled all these statues yesterday is because they were calling for an Indigenous Peoples Day of Rage. And of course, Trump had to come out and acknowledge this lawless behavior because we all know Ted Wheeler, everybody's favorite punching bag, isn't going to do a fucking thing about it. So, hey, Trump has to stand up and do all that he can, really, because he's not federally allowed, well, constitutionally allowed to go in there and just start cracking skulls. So, he can at least take pot shots from afar addressing this lawless behavior. President Trump condemned the Indigenous Peoples' Day of Rage protest in Portland, Oregon over the weekend, calling for law enforcement to arrest the demonstrators. Put these animals in jail now. Oh boy, that's just gonna be fucking clickbait headlines for BuzzFeed and the fucking Atlantic. Oh, he's calling people that were protesting, a disproportionately large part of them were minorities. He's calling minorities animals. I can already see the headlines. Trump said Monday in a series of tweets denouncing the Sunday protest that police designated as a riot, very important to note, which resulted in the statues of Presidents Theodore Roosevelt and Abraham Lincoln being knocked down. That's just what we've seen. The radical left fools in Portland don't want any help from real law enforcement, which we will provide instantaneously. Vote. That was a part of his vote tweet where he was, if you didn't see it, he was condemning New York City, Los Angeles, and yeah, pretty much take your pick. Your Democratic city of choice there is in ruins. Vote. The radical left only knows how to take advantage of a very dumb leadership fools. This is Biden, law and order. You can't say he doesn't provide chuckles, like him or not, man. A crowd of 200 people gathered for an event promoted on social media as an Indigenous Peoples' Day of Rage. That called for an end to colonialism and the abolishment of police. What the Okay, I understand. If you're going to use general terms like Indigenous people, who the fuck do you want the land returned to? There were tribes that were warring over the land long before white people got here, long before the European settlers, long before, the Spanish or the French made their way over. The land has been recycled long before, and it'll be recycled long after we're all here. And of course, abolish the police because, well, you have nothing else to talk about, so just throw that on the end of any fucking flyer you want to put up for these degenerate gatherings. The protests came on the eve of Columbus Day federal holiday, which if you're Canadian, happy Thanksgiving, and if you're an American, enjoy your Columbus Day, which several states and cities now recognize as Indigenous Peoples' Day after Christopher Columbus's violence against Indigenous people. Oh, come on, he didn't do all bad things. He made sure that they were nice and warm for the winter. Ooh. The Portland Police Bureau tweeted about mass gathering shortly after 8:30 local time, noting some participants were attempting to take down a statue with a chain. Of course. The police said that those involved in the criminal behavior are subject to arrest or citation. Or if you're in Chicago, you just have to wait until the middle of the night, and then you can just wait for the police to take it down for you. That's what Lori Lightfoot did with a Columbus statue in the center of Chicago, I do believe. So, I know the story's correct, I just forget where the placement of the statue is. The gathering was later declared as riots after police received reports of windows being broken in numerous buildings. Well, to be fair, that's just a normal night in Portland now, isn't it? Yuri Bezmenov was right when he said normalization was one of the steps of how to demoralize a populace. While we're talking about Mr. Bezmenov, these tactics that all of these fucking goofs are using in general, what I perceive it as is rewriting history. What they're trying to do is fundamentally tear down Western culture and American culture, to be more specific in this case. They take the critical theory, intersectional theory of it's rotten to its core, American society is, and that it needs to be uprooted wholly and returned to the people for which it came. But where does it end? If I'm going to quote John Oliver from earlier before. There has to be a logical conclusion to the end of it, right? You can't just go from Twizzlers to black tar heroin, right? Like, I know my background is more mixed than Kamala Harris's, and I wouldn't know where to return any of my, native land. Who should I be upset about? Who should I go after in order to get my land back? Or on my Irish side or my Scottish side? Or which Russians should I be mad about for, starving several million Ukrainians? But realistically, who gives a fuck? All of this has been long settled, and I'm living a pretty good life out here. But these tactics of tearing down statues, of going back and revisiting historical men and women of the past, and claiming that they're racists or sexists or misogynist, homophobic, whatever the fuck you want to call it, and viewing everything through a lens of intersectionality or critical theory, does nobody any good. All they're trying to do is just, like I said 100 times already, rewrite history. And they're just old Soviet tactics. They're just old communistic totalitarian tactics. And we have a very good book that categorized all this. And you can also just check back in history. But one of the most cited sources here lately, at least since the beginning of the riots, has been George Orwell's masterpiece, 1984. And you know what? We're just going to cite the source. I have this very good article that mixes a bunch of different sources in with it, but we're just going to focus on the 1984 piece here. In the novel, Winston Smith is a junior official in the Ministry of Truth, which now we can call Black Lives Matter and Antifa, the NSOC regime's propaganda ministry, where he rewrites old newspaper reports to reconcile them with the latest party line. One day, Winston comes across a stray photograph that proves the notorious traitors Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford were in New York on the same day they had confessed to meeting with Trotsky-like Emmanuel Goldstein in Eurasia. This may have been Orwell's tribute to the case of E.S. Holtzman. Orwell called 1984 a novel about the future, but it was also a deeply researched story about the past. Orwell had endured a brief taste of the nightmare atmosphere of a police state in 1937 when he was fighting for the Republic against General Franco in the Spanish Civil War. The British author fought with the POUM, a small and vulnerable Marxist movement regarded with suspicion by the Soviet-backed Republican forces. When Barcelona fell into the hands of the Stalinists, the POUM was accused of conspiring with both Trotsky and Franco. It's very important to note that George Orwell was in fact a Marxist himself before seeing the light and realizing that communism, socialism, all these totalitarian regimes are in fact inherently evil organizations. This was Orwell's only first-hand experience of tyranny, but he merged those vivid memories with information culled from myriad conversations, books, pamphlets, and articles. In the first-person account of the life of the Soviet Union or Germany was published in English or French between 1936 and 48, when there was a strong chance that Orwell read it. Details of totalitarianism that are now commonplace in history books were leaking out sporadically, and Orwell was busy collecting them, years before he had the idea for the novel about such a regime. The paranoia, deceit, and betrayal that he had encountered in Spain had left him with an urgent desire to learn as much as he possibly could about totalitarian methods. One of those illuminating books was An Assignment in Utopia, 1937, by American journalist Eugene Lyons, a former communist and Moscow correspondent, which probably led to George Orwell's de-radicalization, by the way, who had become disgusted by Stalinism. Lyons was fascinated by the numerical slogan designed under Stalin to inspire workers to complete the 5-year plan, a list of economic goals in just 4 years. The formula 2 + 2 = 5 instantly riveted my attention. It seems to me at once bold and preposterous. The daring and the paradox and the tragic absurdity of the Soviet scene. Its mystical simplicity, too much Soviet research. Its defiance of logic, all reduced to noise-thumbing arithmetic. Orwell used an unreal equation in a book review a few months later, and eventually made it a symbolic battlefield in the psychological war between Winston and O'Brien. In the novel, 2 + 2 = 5 is obscenely false, but saying black is white or up is down. But in Stalin's Russia, it decorated billboards. And as you can see there, that's Yakov Gumner's propaganda poster from 1931. This was a real thing. And for those of you who are kind of immersed in the news culture, 2 + 2 = 5 had a bit of a renaissance a couple months back. And for those of you coming across this absurdity for the first time, I have a Popular Mechanics article pulled up. Yes, this isn't some fringe conspiracy theory. This is a legitimate, well, seemingly legitimate science magazine, and why some people think 2 + 2 = 5, and why they're right. See how absurd this is? This is absolute concrete fact. 2 + 2 = 4. And there are perverse methods afoot that attempt to undermine every single thing that you know. Everything that you know to be correct. Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. Abraham Lincoln was not a racist. George Washington laid the founding documents to create the bedrock of the society that made the US and Western society into what it is today, a great system, the best one in the world. Everybody agrees. You can have your little critiques, but you can't rewrite history to fit the narrative of today. You can't look at things through the scope of how you see them today. What is racist now wasn't racist back then, because I'm not even too sure what everybody claims to be racist today is even racist at all whatsoever. Just because you can see the differentiation between what somebody who is black is saying about another person who is black, just because you don't agree with the one black person doesn't make that person a racist, or even trying to claim that they're white, or they're manifesting their whiteness, rather, if I'm to use the proper terminology, does not make it any less absurd, and you shouldn't be taking it seriously whatsoever. That's why I think things like that are so pernicious, and why you should understand the importance of knowing your history, to understand your values, to make yourself a complete individual by reading, by absorbing knowledge, and differentiating truth from fiction. Because on one side you have people telling you everything's going to be okay, it's never going to get that bad, John Oliver. And then on the other hand, you have popular mechanics saying 2 + 2 = 5. Really? Because it can in some situations. Therefore, there's no constructions out there. Nothing really makes sense. Everything can be reduced to what you want it to be. No, that's not the case. Things mean what things mean, okay? It's so fucking bizarre that I have to make such basic arguments, such obvious observations, and speak them into existence in order for people to understand. And if you've made it this far in the video, clearly you understand. Clearly you know that absurdity is afoot in society, and you're trying to get to the bottom of it. And I appreciate you doing as much, because that's the type of journey we're on over here. And if you want to discuss some absurdity, feel free to drop any concerns you have in that comment section down below. Or hey, if you want to hit that subscribe button to stay notified as to all the different topics we like to hit over on this channel, or if you just want to drop a like if you appreciate what we're doing here. All of it is greatly appreciated, and just be careful of what's going on out there. Don't be gaslit into thinking that the founding fathers weren't great people, that what you know to be empirically true isn't in fact false. Just be the best person you can be. And before I turn into Tony Robbins, I will bid you adieu and thank you for the gift of your time. I've been Don Consuelo. I want you to follow your gut and get after it. Take care, everyone.